My love for fighting games has been reignited, and that's because there's a lot to be excited about. Bridget is back. I've won one game of DNF Duel online. Dragon Ball FighterZ is getting good online. Sam Show is getting good online. Guilty Gear Xrd Rev 2 is getting good online. Multiverses is pretty fun. I bounced off Rumbleverse, but hey, if you like it, good for you. Tekken 8 has been announced. Street Fighter 6 looks cool. Jury looks great. Listen to her theme. It's a really good time to be a fighting game fan. Fighting games are my favorite genre of competitive games. I've done MOBAs, like a lot of them. I'm not good. I'm terrible. I've tried a couple battle royale games. They're all right, but nothing has held my personal attention like this persistent force that has been around since arcades, which I think is part of their appeal, but also why people can be so afraid of trying them. These games have a lineage unlike any other modern genre. This legacy extends beyond just video games. Look at these shoes. These seem like a completely innocuous pair of Air Force Ones, until you see the inside tab on the tongue. It has this sequence of arrows and letters that is none other than the Daigo Parry. One of the most famous moments in all of video games, really, embroidered onto these shoes. These shoes don't even have anything to do with Street Fighter 3. This is purely a fighting game community thing. I could try to explain how this genre does take work, but it's not actually as difficult as it seems. But this Polygon video does a way better job than I could, and if you haven't watched it, go check it out sometime. It's really good. It's a great jumping on point if you've never tried the genre and are interested. I've been into these games for years, and even I genuinely got something out of watching it. But if you did already watch it and maybe want to know a little bit more, or are just passingly familiar with the genre, allow me to explain why it's so cool. My earliest memories of playing any fighting game was playing Melee at my friend's house. He lived 4 doors down the street from me. His younger brother would always do the thing where he'd inhale you as Kirby and then jump off the ledge, but right before you would both fall off the screen, he would spit you out and float back to safety himself as you respawn and go through it again and again. I also played Smash Bros. 64 because my orthodontist office had it in this sealed TV setup. The controllers were attached to the TV on this arm thing. You could move up and down to be a little easier to hold. One of the controllers was set lower than the other so that younger kids could reach it easier. It was a big deal when you went from the lower controller to the higher controller. I'm not saying all the other kids would get hyped because you got taller. It was just kind of an internal thing, for me at least. I didn't even realize till way later that I was playing 2 different games. I thought they were both Melee, and the one at the orthodontist just had shitty controllers. I say shitty because the controllers at the orthodontist, the sticks were always loose or just straight up broken because, it's kids using some shit that's not theirs. That and N64 controllers feel like shit. My next significant fighting game memory was when I was at a Costco. A grown man with a beard was playing Street Fighter 2 at a displayed version of the arcade cabinet that they had for sale. I made my mom stand there and wait as I watched this guy run through the arcade ladder. Eventually, he looked over at us and offered to play around against me. One of us played as Dalzin. I got absolutely smoked. I think it was a double perfect. Then a few years later, I was visiting my sister when she was in college. A friend of hers had Ultimate Marvel 3, and again, I got completely smoked. Not too long after that, I would buy Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition, which eventually led to Ultra Street Fighter 4, and so on, to today. The town I grew up in didn't have a designated arcade, but there were movie theaters and bowling alleys nearby. They had games like Area 51 or Star Wars Racer Arcade, which fucking owned, by the way, is the fact that the seat looked like the pod from the Pod Racer was chef's kiss beautiful. The arcade does persist today through things like mini golf places and bars, but a lot of video games don't actually feel like they came from an arcade. They were never designed for them. I would love to see what an arcade cabinet for something like FF14 would look like. There is an exception, and that's fighting games. A lot of times, these games will still come out in arcades. Guilty Gear Strive is getting ported. It was a whole 2 years before Tekken 7 even came to home consoles from arcades. So let's focus on that. The arcadiness of this genre that is so ingrained in it that when I mentioned Multiverses and Rumbleverse being fighting games earlier, some people may have taken issue with that. Not everyone, but some people. Andrew. And to be fair, these games don't resemble the arcade standard of visuals or input like Street Fighter, Soul Calibur, Tekken, Guilty Gear, and even Tobal No. 2 has. There are many genres that have weird ancestors in arcades, but those are very different from their modern-day associates. Light gun games resemble first-person shooters of today, but don't feel the same to play. Beat-em-ups became modern-day action games. Rhythm games and shoot-em-ups exist, but are incredibly niche, and playing them at home is not like playing them in an arcade. Games like Q*bert, Donkey Kong, and Mario Bros. Are rudimentary platformers. Death Stranding is Pac-Man 2. But fighting games have stayed very much the same. Street Fighter 2 is a lot closer to BlazBlue Central Fiction than House of the Dead is to Overwatch, and that's in part how we physically interact with them. I would have to hop through some pretty extreme hoops to try and play the latter like the former, but I can use the right controller and play any of these classic fighters and have it feel like an arcade, and I do. I love these big clunky boxes. I have 3 of them. I love it when you turn the stick and it goes click, 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 and then you press the buttons and they go. I feel like I play better on them, but you don't have to if you don't want to. There are plenty of pro players who use a gamepad and do great. Something else I like about arcade sticks is it's way more comfortable for me after long periods of play. I reference Overwatch quite a bit later because I've been playing it with my girlfriend. We'll pass the controller between rounds, and when I'm not playing, I have to do rock climbing stretches because playing Zenyatta wrecks my delicate little wrists. I can play games on a stick for hours with no issues. It's part of the reason I'm drawn to these games. But what about them feels so distinct? What gives fighting games their arcade sticking power? And what about arcade games, other than them being literally older, seem so different than modern games? I think if you look at a lot of older arcade games, they were honestly a weird middle ground between being something totally new and a classic carnival game. I never thought of them like that until I first went to one of my favorite San Francisco spots, Musée Mécanique. It has all these odd little baseball games with characters cut out of tin. It has puppets that sing and dance, pinball, skee-ball, and an X-Men vs. Street Fighter cabinet. It fucking shreds in there. Musée Mécanique puts this through line between fighting games, carnival games, and older machines like the Love Tester out on display. When you Google what was the first fighting game, you won't see Karate Champ 84, but Heavyweight Champ, a game with seemingly no buttons, but instead 2 giant gloves that each player holds and moves up and down on levers to fight each other. I don't really know how the game plays. There are apparently no playable versions of it around today, and very little footage of the game exists, which I think is a huge bummer. But look at this game. How different is this from something like this? It's certainly closer to that than this machine is to 13 Sentinels. Then take this information and look at the very first cabinet of Street Fighter. They didn't have 6 buttons, 3 for punches, 3 for kicks, varying from light, medium to hard. It instead had 2 giant pressure-sensitive buttons, one for punches and the other for kicks, that would do the different versions of each attack depending on how hard you hit it. And no surprise, they didn't work very well. They later opted to have the 6-button format I spoke of earlier. And what I think you're seeing here is the perfect example of the handoff from carnival game to video game. In carnival games, the gameplay focus is on how you interact with it. The gameplay was originally doing a simple task with a difficult form of input, trying to ring a bell with this hammer, for example. This became things like the jank Street Fighter cabinet that sucked, and then the updated version which made the inputs more accessible. It brought arcade games from this to this. What I mean is by taking away the hoops necessary to interact with the game, it allows you to do more things in the game, giving way to depth of gameplay. Now, the focus of gameplay here is instead what you do in the game. We can stretch this into modern day games that make physically interacting with it as accessible as possible in favor of the mechanics feeling good. We can now draw a fairly direct line between the BB gun shooting gallery and Fortnite. We can take Heavyweight Champ and connect it to Smash Bros. The way a game like Multiverses plays would be weird but not impossible on an arcade cabinet. Its button layout works best on a controller. Rumbleverse would just straight up not work. That game is designed around a controller and you're playing against 39 other people at all times. These are fighting games utilizing the standards of modern hardware, but not modern hardware in a aesthetics sense, modern hardware in terms of input. What I'm trying to say is the way we interact with these games can change how people think of them. This is in part because video game genres are really weird. I feel like the big thing that differentiates video game genres from something like film is how we actually classify them. Genres in film can be a way to describe how interacting with a work makes you feel, while video game genres can be seen as how you interact with a piece. And this can get really weird. Games like Outer Worlds, Persona, and Disco Elysium are all RPGs. One is the modern idea of an RPG, the other is a JRPG, and the third is a CRPG. They are all similar, but have their own distinct flavors. This isn't a new thing either. The debate of whether or not A Link to the Past is an RPG has basically been around as long as the game has. We also get the fun thing in gaming of trying to figure out what happens with a new genre. Dark Souls games are RPGs from Japan, but comparing it to Disgaea feels off. But they're also kind of action games, but not like Devil May Cry, and now we're left with Souls-like. Tell me right now, what genre is Vampire Survivors? This isn't even taking into consideration how mishmashy so many modern games are. On its face, Overwatch more resembles something like Doom or Call of Duty than Disco Elysium. But Overwatch is also a role-playing game. It is both things. Putting it next to Shin Megami Tensei feels wrong, but they are in fact weird fucked up cousins, just like Multiverses and Rumbleverse are to Street Fighter 2. Playing these games, you feel the intense personal dialogue between you and your opponent that you get in something like Guilty Gear Strive. You just use 2 sticks on the controller instead of 1. Not every game in the genre should look like Karate Champ 84 to be considered a fighting game, because Karate Champ 84 fucking sucks. Changing up the typical formula can also make these things more accessible, which is just more people enjoying a thing I like. There's no downside here. Luckily, Rumbleverse has very much been embraced by the FGC, even if it's reinventing the wheel by mixing fighting games, wrestling, and battle royale games. It is a BR fighting game. Multiverses had a fairly significant presence at EVO as a big side tournament. It is a platform fighter, clearly built off the bones of Smash Bros., but distinctly its own thing. That thing being Multiverse's change on the focus of its gameplay. While it does have its own mechanically unique characters, those characters are not just designed with how they will play themselves, but also how they will interact with a teammate. 2v2 has basically always been a thing in Smash Bros., both casually and competitively, but its characters aren't designed with it in mind. Unlike Multiverses. By herself, Velma isn't too dangerous, but in the 2v2 environment, she's a devastating narc. It's taking elements of its inspiration and accentuating them to give itself its own identity, just like Fatal Fury King of Fighters did with Street Fighter 2. There are even more fighting game subgenres like arena fighters, but those are mainly delegated to things like My Heroes One Justice or the Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi series. There's also Kasuge. Kasuge rocks. Some of these games would be difficult or just straight up impossible to play on an arcade stick, but that doesn't matter. I don't actually need to justify these games being called fighters, because that's not the point of this video. What I'm doing right now is just mansplaining innovation, because that's what this video is actually about. Because right now, fighting games are doing some cool ass shit.
Thank me later.
So I already explained how Rumbleverse and Multiverses are doing this, but I've neglected to talk about our arcade classic fighters, and I will. The only way I know how, by going back to 1993 and talking about Samurai Showdown. Samurai Showdown, or Samurai Spirits in Japan, was the first fighting game to introduce a staple of the genre, and that's super meter. Fighting games love meter. Some have more than one. Sometimes that meter looks like this. This X is a meter. The moon, that's a meter. There are some minor differences in how it works, but by and large, fighting games will have you gain meter from your character taking damage or by attacking. Some games have both. Originally, the meter was just there to get full, then let you do your super move, which is its own iteration of special moves that, as we know them, were introduced in Street Fighter, but games like Shanghai Kid had them too. It was something you could do to close out a game, or as a way to mount a comeback against an opponent. Almost every game in this genre has super these days. It's as basic as walking. Not every game, though. Games with 3D movement like Tekken and Soul Calibur aren't incredibly meter reliant. Soul Calibur 5 was the first major 3D fighter to have super meter. Tekken 7 still doesn't really. A few characters do, but they're by and large guest characters from games with the mechanic, so for a majority of the main roster, they get their supers through the rage system. Supers are cool. People like them. It feels good to do the stick motion twice and press a button. But what if we added something else? What if instead we did the stick motion once and hit 2 buttons? It doesn't even matter what 2 buttons, as long as they're both punches or both kicks. That is where my best friend Morgan Island comes into the scene in 1994 and gave us a new way to use meter, EX moves. EX moves are a super cool half step between a super and a special. It allows for more player expression through gameplay, just like giving you more buttons instead of one big button. Maybe instead of a shorter combo ending in a super, you could opt for a longer combo with multiple EX moves. There probably is a game out there that does have a super in-depth EX system that will change the properties of a move depending on if you do a light punch and a medium punch versus the medium punch and heavy punch version, but that game probably has like 7 dudes who are super into it and looks like this. Darkstalkers allowed you to do one EX move for a meter, but the modern version of EX moves taking up a small segment of the bar can actually be traced back to Street Fighter the movie The Game for the Sega Saturn. But for a long time we had this problem, and it's that all meters were more or less the same. You gained it by being on defense or by being on the attack, used it to do a big move or sometimes a slightly bigger move. There are other cases of games experimenting with meter. Guilty Gear Strive allows you to use your meter to block better or cancel out of moves. Mortal Kombat 11 has 1 meter for offensive moves, 1 for defensive moves, but as much as I like Guilty Gear Strive, I wish it had EXs. And Mortal Kombat 11 just sucks.
Mortal Kombat 11.
There are other interesting subsystems in fighting games. The weird tug-of-war that is Under Night's grid system comes to mind. Under Night Owns, by the way, is when I ran monthlies, we would always switch to that when the tournament was done. Shit rocks. Basically, this mechanic that had become a staple of the genre was seemingly solved, and solved in like 1994. We tried adding more meters, ultras, and the X I mentioned earlier, but it was essentially just more of the same. Then we get to today, and like I said forever ago, fighting games are doing some cool ass shit. So I totally get why a game like DNF Duel isn't doing too hot, and it's really not. Look at this game's player base. It's only 3 months after launch, and compare it to other fighting games at the same point in time. Every game loses players as time goes on, but in the case of DNF Duel, it's shockingly extreme. This game is built in a niche genre that is a spin-off of another super niche game, but at least the original is free to play while this is nearly full price. Which is a shame because this game is really cool at a casual level. The simplified inputs make it more accessible for new players. I do wish the game had some kind of system to break out of your opponent's combos and universal air dashing, but other than that, this game is super fun. I do honestly wish it was free to play. This game is really at its peak when it's you and your friends and you can just shoot the shit and do goofy combos. I know people who would absolutely have fun trying this game in this hangout setting, but it's $50, and that's a big ask for someone to get to play once a week at most. Ghostblade is really cool. Inquisitor will drench you in oil and set you on fire and shit. Dragon Knight has this cool little dude that flies around with her. This shit is fun when I'm getting a chance to play it because outside of your casual friend group, Striker does have an infinite. And not just that, but there are other characters that have some goofy ass shit that make it not as fulfilling competitively. It seems like at a certain point, the best thing to do is just pick one of the characters that in 1 or 2 interactions can just end the game. One thing that is important that happened as I was making this video is the developers behind DNF Duel announced that they're doing an update and they're only going to be buffing characters. No one's getting anything taken away. Everyone is just getting all their stuff better. So hopefully every character can be equally weird and fucked up because then it's kind of fair. And honestly, I'm here for it. That sounds great. But more importantly, this game has a cool meter and it uses that meter in a really interesting way. So while most games start you out with no meter or sometimes maybe a full meter of a secondary type, DNF Duel starts you with half, and it refills whenever you aren't spending it. And when you lose life, your total meter increases. But why give you so much of this resource? That must mean you're burning through EXs and supers, yeah? Well, yes and no. Supers work like the rage system in Tekken, meaning you only have access to them when your life hits a certain amount. Instead of EX moves, half of your character's specials are unique abilities that are only usable at the cost of your resource. It's similar to EX in the basic framework of a fighting game, but they're actually closer to the idea of a mini super or a spell. It's not a super meter, it's not V-trigger, it's not playing tug of war, it's something else. This is a mana bar. Rumbleverse brought the gameplay of battle royale games into a fighting game system. DNF Duel is bringing the RPG mana system into a fighting game. You have all your moves, just some of them take extra meter to cast. You have abilities in League of Legends, but when you're out of mana, you always have your basic auto attack. Just like in DNF Duel, you always have your other moves. It's innovating. Assuming your health is full, you're only going to get 2 meter burn moves off in a combo. You can also burn life to refill your meter faster if you need to in a pinch. DNF Duel isn't just bringing RPG systems into fighting games, but into arcade-style gameplay in general. RPGs are a genre that don't really have a direct tie to arcades. There are games like the Gauntlet series, but those didn't get real RPG mechanics until Gauntlet Legends, and even then it's considered a hack-and-slash dungeon crawler with RPG mechanics. This is also a really flashy way to build your game for a few reasons. Firstly, there's almost always a number going up on the screen, and that's good. Number go up is good. My number go up mean other person number go down, because fuck them and their number. Secondly, you're getting to do really cool things at the cost of a resource. That makes us think about our actions more than just pressing a button. We want to do a move that has a really exciting long animation. It is cathartic to see your opponent get rocked by this giant flaming wheel, but we have to wait for the right opportunity to do so, which could be said about most fighting games, but with DNF Duel, you're able to go through this kind of decision making at a much faster rate than something like Melty Blood type Lumina, because while the special moves attached to the moon icon in that game are actually quite similar to Duel's meter burns, you gain that meter back at such an incredibly higher rate that the flow of gameplay totally changes. Now, what if I said one of the most exciting things a new game is doing is going back to the Samurai Showdown Street Fighter 2 style of your super meter only doing supers? That'd be weird, right? No EXs, no special move canceling, just supers. I mean, that's what Grand Blue Fantasy Versus did at launch, and people were really unhappy with it. But what if we took that bare bones super system and the mana system from DNF Duel and taped them on top of each other? Allow me to introduce Street Fighter 6's drive system. I did lie a little bit. It's true, the super meter in 6 only does that one thing, but there are still EXs in the game, but they're completely divorced from the super meter, which is literally the first time I've ever seen a game do this, and I own this many fighting games. Street Fighter 6's new drive system is weird and fascinating. These moves, now called overdrives, are far from the only thing you can do in this system. You get focus attacks, parries, alpha counters, even Guilty Gear-esque dash cancels. You have a full drive meter at the start of each round, and just like DNF Duel's mana system, you gain it back over time, but also from successful parries. And if you run out of drive, you'll get it back eventually, but drive really hard not to die before then. Drive is also a really cute system. It's taking unique mechanics from the history of Street Fighter and applying it all to one super versatile meter. I like RPGs a lot, and I think being able to change your character's kit and customize them to your playstyle is a cool and fun way to express yourself through gameplay. But I also think just giving you all of the options and then deciding what you do and don't like is great, especially in this genre. Like, I don't want every game to have Tekken move lists because those are kind of terrifying even to me now, but having enough options that on the fly I can shift between different styles or maybe find something comfortable in the middle is really exciting to me. One of my favorite memories playing Guilty Gear Xrd is when I beat a guy using Dizzy's long range and zoning him out, for him to then message me saying I played like a bitch, rematching with him and beating him again, but this time by running in close and beating him at that tighter range. And with Street Fighter 6, this game is not just enabling that by giving you all these options with drive, but also encouraging it by giving you so much meter to play with. Now, admittedly, I haven't actually played Street Fighter 6. It's not out till next year. I'm just really excited. Yeah, I'm gonna pre-order this game, but that's because I'm a dumbass. You should wait till a review comes out, then decide if you want to buy it or don't. I don't care. If the game sucks, whatever. I'm not your mom. I am very passionate about these games, and seeing them grow makes me happy, which I hope is obvious at this point. I didn't always consider myself a fan of fighting games until I got into Street Fighter 4, and when I saw Jury, but they've been a big part of my life for a long time. I don't really have access to play Melee anymore, but I can play Multiverses and feel something somewhat familiar but new. I can play Ultra Street Fighter 4 right now. Jury will have her dive kick and her taunt. I can also be excited for Street Fighter 6, where Jury will have other new things and her dive kick. I love that Arc System Works is going back and updating the online play for older games, and I can play Guilty Gear Strive. I want new people to see these new systems and be interested, and then if they want to, they can go back to the older games, if they feel like it. I'm just glad that this genre doesn't seem to be stuck in 1994. I am hopeful for the future. I'm the Media Diver. Thank you for going on this dive with me, and I hope I'll see you in the next one.